So it is my pleasure to have Josh Meyer from Civic Well here, and Dan Burden of Blue Zones, and Victor Dover of Dover Coal and Partners. I think most of you are familiar with them, but I will briefly say that Josh has expertise all through California doing city compact development planning, green infrastructure planning, form-based code. He works in rural areas as well as city downtowns, and just has been instrumental in transforming many of our communities in California with Civic Well. Dan Burden of Blue Zones, Time named him one of the 6 most innovative civic innovators in the world. And Victor Dover has co-authored a book, Street Design, The Secret of Successful Cities and Towns. Charming, lovely, great cities and towns, which is now almost at the printing press for a 2nd edition, and it has become a standard textbook for academia, college courses, and also an instrument, as I understand, for residents who see it and use it as a tool to talk to their decision makers. So, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you all for being here, and I will hand it to Dan, who then will introduce Victor as well as the time comes. Thank you.
And you'll find that Victor and I are going to pass the baton back and forth several times during the evening. We want to keep you engaged and change out the voices from time to time. So, I have a couple of quick questions. How many of you are on one of the events this week? Right, that's a really good number. And how many of you took part in the original set of walking out? It's about 18 months ago. Wow, this is pretty amazing. I may just have you guys come up and present. This is pretty good. We're putting together a set of presentations to build the vocabulary. We're finding that Humboldt County residents are really among the more knowledgeable. So we're starting at a higher level than we would normally think, but we want to make sure you have the right grounding, the right base. So I'm going to start a little bit just to get some thoughts flowing about why we do what we do. And I think this is the magic tool to do that. And then I'm going to make it much easier for our recorder. I'm going to step back here. Is that better for you?
Cool.
Okay, thanks. And as we do this, I want to get into what is really, oh no, I'm going backward. I need to go this. You already taught me which button to push. That's half of life, is learning which button to push. Portland is now building bridges just for transit, walking, and bicycling, no cars. It's giving direct feed into the neighborhood. It's connecting really important parts of its neighborhood, and it's resulting in some amazing numbers of people who are now not only living and working in these zones, but now just coming to enjoy the whole pleasure of being a resident of Portland. So I'm going to start with a question. Why do we have cities? And I'm looking for an answer, any one. Why do cities exist? What's the purpose? Yes?
Economic and social connections.
Economic and social, boy, you got it without saying the actual word. But I'm going to give you 100% on that one. Cities exist in order to maximize exchange. But it's more than the exchange of our goods, our service, and all of that. It's the exchange of our culture, our friendship, our ideas, and knowledge. And by building cities correctly, we're able to achieve that. But in the last 50, 60 years, we've been undoing these very principles and just maximizing how much time we spend on our cars. And that is not why cities came to exist. It's just the flip opposite. So let's go back in time and figure out who designed Key West. It's incredibly walkable. Any guesses on who the designers of Key West were?
Ernest Hemingway.
It could have been. Pirates. Seriously, pirates laid out the original streets of Key West, right? And so on average, how many years of college did a pirate go to? Now we're going to look at the rest of Key West, which was designed by college graduates.
Oh.
And the streets don't drain. The what are you going to do when you get off of the bus? And what in the world does that arrow mean anyway? This truly breaks every rule of common sense, but that's why I want to embrace and say, those of you who feel that you don't have enough schooling on how to build a city, maybe you do. And that sometimes you and only you knew how to overcome the problems that we created. So, what percentage of people do you think would walk here?
2.
About 2%. Yeah. Unfortunately, this is an international drive in Orlando. So if you go to the Disney Kingdom or whatever, you got to go through this stuff, right? And but what about here? And I think this is a truism that people are happiest when there are no cars, and the cars are happiest when there are no other cars. But what people want are many other people around. The flip opposite, see? So it's essential that we figure out why we should be designing our cities for people and place. And once we do, and the cities have figured this out, there's less car traffic. There's more movement of cars because there's now a choice in how people travel. I'm going to give a quick intro to the organization that I am now a fellow of. This project is sponsored or being carried out by Blue Zones. But the gentleman who you see standing on his head is now the most published person in the history of National Geographic. He's put out about 8 books from them. Dan Buettner, he and I consider one another brothers. He is an amazing person who went out and researched how people live longer and happier and healthier lives. And it's very important to understand that if we shape the cities correctly, we keep our own shape. And it's just that simple. Dan refers to walkability and the correct built environment as being the tools for health. And he's totally correct. People will walk more when there's a good environment. And I'll give a couple contrasts throughout my presentation. Notice the scene in the bottom right. That's where I lived for 10 years, Missoula, Montana. And do you see any people? There's only one person out in the middle, and she's stuck there. But up in the upper picture, the road is just packed with people, and the only cars you see are cars trying to find a place to park. And these are both the same by category, the same street. One is poorly designed only for cars. The other one is correctly designed for all uses, all modes of transportation. Here's the wonderful statistic that Dan's research uncovered. Only 20% of how long we live is based on our genes. We don't control those things were passed on to us. But the other 80% are within our control. It's what we eat, it's our lifestyle. Do we have a purpose in life? Do we live in the right zip code? The very first Blue Zone community that we worked in to apply the principles is Albert Lee, Minnesota. And when we finished the first phase of the project, which is Main Street behind us, you can see out in front was still a road with hardly any cars moving at all. And the Minnesota DOT, which controlled that road, wanted to just repave and keep the same pattern. But the community of Albert Lee had come together and they said, no, you're not. Take your money and destroy someone else's town. We want you to do it right. Well, Minnesota DOT can't really take the money somewhere else. It's their responsibility to keep the road correct. So they finally agreed with the community and they came back, and essentially the road now looks like this. More buildings, more walking, more biking, safer street by taking out the lanes and building for people and instead of places. So I'm going to pass the baton to Victor now, but if we truly want less auto traffic, we have to start building for all modes to be successful. As I introduced Victor, we're both, well, I'm a former Floridian for 32 years. Victor, you spent most of your life in the South and certainly Florida, but he's become one of my chief mentors in my life. So I'm going to sit back and enjoy learning as much as I can this evening from Victor Dover.
Thank you, Dan. You know, Dan Burton is the Johnny Appleseed of walkable communities, who has a tendency to show up in 200 or 300 cities a year and make presentations and walk around like he did with all of us over the last couple of days. And so, Dan, you are a national treasure. I want to talk about putting back together some things that are usually separate. All right, and for a long time have been taken as customary to be separate. And Dan is going to follow that with some details and tools that we can apply in specific street design situations in particular. But zooming out just a little bit, you probably have heard this before. Brent Tadarian, the former planning director in Vancouver, famously said, the best transportation plan is a good land use plan. I would amend that a little, say a good land use and urban design plan. And what he meant by that is the secret to where all the traffic congestion comes from. Do you want to know where all the traffic congestion comes from? I can explain. And I'm going to give you the secret to solving it here momentarily. So the first thing I want you to remember, and the last thing I want you to remember, is that we already have around us in the built environment an amazing textbook on how to get things right. Because just like Dan's example from the Pirates in Old Town Key West, when Americans were poorer but smarter, as the phrase goes, we were really good at settlement. We knew how to make towns, how to set them up, and then allow them to incrementally grow as their economies and markets and populations grew, and to get better and better with time. And those customs that existed as just absolute norms, even pirates could do it, from colonial times until the 1940s, are the secret to putting back together land use, urban design, transportation, public space. And in Humboldt County, you have spectacular examples of the original green, recyclable, enduring types of settlements in Old Town, in Ferndale, and in many other places. We have to be able to squint and imagine how we would change the places we've inherited a little bit, in some places a lot more in others, to turn them into the places that we want them to be. I often say we're in the before and after business. You have to be able to visualize change before it occurs. That's the essence of planning. And this is an example Dan showed last night from, that's the first street we ever designed, by the way, 1992, I think, that got built. Anyway, the existing street on the left, that's what we inherited. Every generation has the obligation to make timely upgrades to the built environment that we inherit. And it changed from being just a dead, biologically sterile place to being the social center of the neighborhood. And it wasn't about building a lot of new buildings. It was about fixing some rules. We had to repeal a prohibition on outdoor dining. Can you believe they had that? And the zoning ordinance that said outdoor dining is expressly prohibited by this land development code. They added the word expressly, which I think our code writing professor would tell us is not the way we're supposed to do it. What's that word for anyway? I guess they really wanted to drive the point home. They repealed that, and instantly humans knew what to do with permissions and with better public space. So where does the traffic congestion come from? And what can you do about it? The traffic congestion comes from pushing our land uses farther apart, designing the environment in between them, now that you have to make these longer trips from each of the things you do in your daily life, design the spaces in between them so that it feels unnatural to walk or bike or use transit. Feels like you're only doing it right if you're driving everywhere for everything every time. Usually one person per vehicle. We take that for granted. We're so numb to it at this point, probably have forgotten that hasn't always been that way. Our historic places weren't designed on that basis. A shorthand way to remember what David Inwood taught us from the book that Dan quoted before is that cities were designed to minimize the need for transportation, to shorten travel. That's what they're for. So you wouldn't have to spend all these hours or days on a horse to go from one activity to another, but instead you could just walk down the street and do it. That's what they're for. But if you get in a helicopter, or you set up your drone and you look at a picture of many of the intersections in coastal California, or in coastal Florida for that matter, you could be forgiven for thinking that obviously the purpose of the city is to maximize the amount of transportation people undertake. So where does it come from? It comes from the way we put land uses on the ground, not just how we mix them or don't, but how we connect them or don't. So if you're making a trip from home to soccer, for example, you have to go out on the regional road network in the conventional sprawl pattern and fight for lane space with all the other people who are doing the same exact thing at the same exact time. The traffic congestion comes from having too few routes, too few intersections that you seem to need to use right when somebody else is trying to use it. And it might just be some frustrated road ragey driver who doesn't want to take 17 extra seconds to get to their destination, but also could be a first responder trying to respond to your grandparents' cardiac arrest, for example. So it's no small thing. Now, the solution to this is not really in the transportation facilities, or at least not only there. It's largely in the other stuff, the form and pattern and qualities of real estate development. There are comforts and benefits that come from bringing things close together deliberately by design. From Ferndale to Bologna, all over the world, regardless of climate or culture or geography or economy, human beings need things close together, and they tend to want to be delighted by what they find when they go out in public space. Now, if you are in Bologna, you live in this apartment right here, on any given day for the last 350 years, you and your predecessors would have the luxury of being able to walk down that street to the vendor who has the fresh fruit and vegetables. I flashed this slide last night because I think it's an amazing headline, actually. We're not making this up. The Wall Street Journal, Business Insider all seem to agree the key to happiness is being able to walk to coffee. These are for folks of a certain age. In late 20th century planning practice, remember the 20th century? Remember that previous millennium, the one we're done with? Okay, the one we don't have to do anymore? In that time, it was considered normal to use the tools of land development regulation to push things farther apart. And what we have to do is remember how to deliberately bring things closer together, how to improve domestic tranquility as we live closer to one another. And we need less of the land, we need to displace less of the forest or less of the farmland in order to accommodate population change. If we could deliberately learn to get together in communities and get those city comforts or town comforts that I was talking about, to do that, we also want to make sure we still have our privacy. We still have private outdoor open space, and we still have long views across green, things like that. That all comes from getting the design right. The design that's most important is street design. It took me a long time to realize this, but that's why we ended up writing the book. John Massengale and I came to the conclusion that street design was the one thing we could least afford to get wrong. And yet it was the one thing most often gotten wrong in the construction of our modern built environment. And so we set out to put down all these thoughts we'd had over the previous 20 years or so about street design in this big fat book. And we thought, well, that'll be easy. We've done this for a long time. We've thought about it. We learned from Dan Burton. We'll knock this out by Christmas. And it took us till 3.5 more Christmases to get it finished. But in the process of creating the book, we traveled all around. We went back to places we had visited before, or that we knew as students, or ones we had read about. We went to places that our colleagues and friends recommended we check out, and we measured them. We photographed them. We watched them at different times of day and different days of the week to see how they perform. And we put all that in a book. So the subversive tool, Una, is when local leaders, Kimberly, you can do this, take the book to the meeting with public works directors or city engineers or developers and Caltrans and on, I can make a long list, right? And open up the book to one of those pages with the hundreds of pictures and point to one of the pictures and say, ask a simple question. How come we can't have a street like that in our town? That's turned out to be where it's really most useful. Now, I am biased toward trying to get this information in the hands of elected officials. That's why I called you out. So thank you for being here, Kimberly. I recorded a little video series, which you can find on the YouTube channel that you might find fun, called Town Planning Stuff Everyone Needs to Know. But what I'll tell you that's not there on the title card is, by everyone, we mean the mayor and the vice mayor. Because, as Joe Riley, the longtime mayor of Charleston, once taught us, elected officials are the chief urban designers of their cities. They are the ones who give permission to the professionals to get the details right. They are the ones who listen to all of the information, all of the arguments, and all the different points of view, and based on the information they have, the best information they can get, they make decisions, not decisions that are going to necessarily please everyone every time. But in a planning process, usually everybody gets something they want, nobody gets everything they want. And so that's the role of our elected officials in doing that. And when I speak about street design, I am talking about the whole thing, the environment that includes the what the Department of Transportation would consider the transportation facility, the roadway, but also includes all the rest of the ensemble, the buildings, the building to street relationships, the activities that surround the street, the way of making the storefronts, all those are also part of street design. What we really mean by street design is street-oriented urbanism. How to plan as if streets are the most important public spaces you own, which they are. Now, where do you do that? Well, actually, we have a lot of places we can do that where the spaces we've inherited seem built out. I've heard that phrase 5 times this week. Well, you know, in Humboldt County, we're largely built out. In McKinleyville, we're largely built out. In Arcata, we're a built out town. I heard it over and over and over this week. I know this is going to sound like the crazy carpetbagger from Coral Gables coming in and dropping his opinions, but here's mine. You're not built out. In fact, much change will occur during the coming decades. In 50 years, 50% of the buildings you see on the ground will have been built within that 50 years, even if they replace ones that are already there. That's the challenge ahead of you. So you're not built out. And with all that lost space between buildings, you have room to grow and build your way out of your problems. Now, that's going to require a bigger menu of street types. For a long time, traffic engineers were trained to believe in only 3 categories of streets. Local, collector, and arterial. Arterial, collector, local, ACL, sounds like a knee injury, right? And then of course 2 contexts. As the book famously said for 50 years, rural, by which they meant suburban, and urbanizing, by which they also meant suburban. Sorry, only really one context. And so when they applied those rule books to the arterials and collectors and locals, this is the kind of space they created in front of your house, or in front of your neighborhood, or in front of your commerce. All of it designed with the idea that wider and faster roads were better roads, which was wrong. So that great experiment, thankfully, has been called into question. For one of the reasons is probably pretty obvious, it's too expensive. You can't actually afford to maintain that system. And it turns out that since we take so much space when we wear a car around us, that we can't actually all fit in the space that's available. In the lanes at peak hour, or parking spaces, they take too much room. And this interchange, which is the sort of the advanced stage of the problem I just described, you could fit the entirety of Renaissance Florence inside the footprint of that interchange. You know, Michelangelo, Leonardo, the Duomo, you can fit all those in there. It's too wasteful and too expensive to maintain. So we need other alternatives. And here's the key to it. Now this is a bumper sticker, so you can remember this. LU1, TR2. Learned this from Rick Hall, one of our colleagues, and the Dean of Modern American Traffic Engineers. Rick says, a community should do its land use and establish its vision, think about its urban design pattern. In other words, determine what it wants to be when it grows up. And then design the transportation facilities to fit that vision, not the other way around. What's happened all over the Sun Belt during the last 60 years or so is that we've been just designing the transportation systems first, however traumatically, with the disruption that comes from road widenings and highway building, crashing through historic neighborhoods with interstates and all the things that you've seen. And then wait for the communities to figure out how to adapt around them. That's been the world we've lived in. Now, how can they get away with that? It's because transportation actually is where the money is. Of course, the motoring public wants its leaders to get things done. You know, there's something ought to be done about road X or road Y. And so something usually is. Unfortunately, they're not always improvements, even though they always use the word improvement to describe them. Now, because they have the money, when we're planning, we should really let land use and urban design lead and let transportation follow. But when we're implementing, we need to use that treasury to let transportation lead on implementation. But if you do it in the opposite order, if you start with the idea that everybody's going to make a trip in a car by themselves for every time, every day, or everything, then don't be surprised when you end up with a place you don't love as much. Now, I'm describing our things like walkability. This is really a proxy term we use as a kind of stand-in for livability in its greater sense. Because if we make a place where people, also known as pedestrians, actually want to be, then everything else gets easier to solve. Fred Kent famously said, if you plan a city for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for people and places, you get people and places. And it's much easier for places that are built according to the time-tested patterns of your historic districts to adapt to and accommodate the car without being overwhelmed by it than it is for car-oriented places to add walkability in at the end as if you could. After all, the big decisions have been made by serious people like engineers and lawyers. So as we think about that, I'm going to share with you some big things that we have on our minds when we're trying to design a street that reflects the community's values and creates more return on investment for the streets themselves. The first one, it probably didn't occur to you, you're probably thinking capacity. What's the number of trips it can accommodate, right? No, number one is what kind of experience are people going to have when they're there? Because that's going to be the determinant of whether they really want to be there, whether they'll pay for a chance to roost along some of the real estate there, whether they'll come back as visitors. All of those are about what kind of experiences we have when we're in a place. And if a place feels hostile, you want to get through it and get out of it and get away from it. If a place feels welcoming, then you want to spend more time there and maybe open your wallet and put some of the money in one of the cash registers in the storefronts there, and all of those things. Next, we are thinking about interaction, that the daily contact with other people, even strangers, is so good for us and such an important part of being the social beings that we are. We should design the built environment so that those interactions feel natural and occur on a regular basis instead of just rarely. Another one that might surprise you, I think streets are a communications medium. Now, back before we started shifting our communications to all these digital electronic means, transportation and communications were synonyms. Think about it. If you're a Roman and you need to send a message to someone, you're going to put a person on horseback and send them down a street, a road or a trail. That path is a communications medium in the classic sense. So in ancient military textbooks, they use the word communications to mean supplying the troops and connecting to the army in the field. But now, streets are a communications medium in a different sense. They send messages through your eyeballs about what kind of place this is, about what the society there considers important. They send messages to you, again, of welcome or the opposite, of inclusion or not. They send messages to you about whether you are valued, even if you don't have a car wrapped around you, because you might be using transit or moving around on foot or moving around on two wheels. Sometimes those two wheels are one behind the other on a bike. Sometimes those wheels are side by side, like in a wheelchair or a mobility device. When we're thinking about streets, we try to start in the center of the streets, or at least in the old school wider and faster engineering, start in the middle and then add lanes and other things like on-street parking and what have you to accommodate cars. And when you're all done with all that, you see how much right-of-way is left over for these other goodies. No. We should be starting at the edges of the street and working our way toward the center and satisfying the needs of pedestrians first. And I don't mean just a mere utility of being able to move, but actually making it delightful for people to move around on foot. And when we get that right, which might require shade or storefronts with windows, then we see, with the space we have left, how much car travel and car storage we can accommodate in that space. What about transit? A forgotten mode. Public transit is more than just a social service. It should be a completely viable alternative to typical everyday trip making for people at all income levels. Now, in New Orleans, when they built the St. Charles streetcar, they were building the Garden District as the most prestigious part of the city. They set it up so that when they built what the engineers would call a transportation facility, they actually built a linear park. They planted those oaks and they planted the street trees on both sides. And they, in the process, created an address where people wanted to be, St. Charles Avenue. How many of you have been to New Orleans and seen St. Charles? Okay. Did you ever notice these little worn out spots along the tracks here? Anybody want to guess why those are worn out?
Pedestrians.
Footpath? That's right, it's the runners. And occasionally somebody on a fat tire bike. So the runners use this transportation facility to go out for a run. And they hear the little ding, ding, ding of the streetcar. They step out of the way. The streetcar goes by. 17 seconds later, they're on their way. And so these brilliant engineers installed the St. Charles streetcar. They were also building a wellness facility and a great address. Where you are matters a lot. It's that karmic idea, you know, that you should know who you are and be that. Well, you should know where you are and design that way also. Either the place that it's trying to become or reinforcing what it already is. This is a 19th century road widening project built when public works directors were heroes in their communities. And it straightened out a tangle of medieval streets, and this is in the south of France. And they, in the process of doing that, which of course was a transportation facility, they created a great address where all the galleries and hotel rooms naturally went. We think about safety. And safety has a couple of dimensions. Dan will elaborate on it. But of course, one of them is that you're not afraid you're going to get run over by a vehicle. Okay? It turns out that keeping the road space limited and slow and full of visual frictions is a key to keeping people driving at paces that are safe and sane. But there's another kind of safety. What about if you were to call for help for some reason? Would someone hear you? Would they see you out their windows? Or how about a would-be miscreant, somebody who's about to do some kind of criminality in the street? If they look up and they see porches and windows and balconies, they immediately have the sensation that this is a place where they might get seen doing that. The crime prevention folks call this natural surveillance. Sounds very sinister. Natural surveillance. But Jane Jacobs called it eyes on the street. And of course, eyes on any public space, eyes on the park, eyes on the plaza are part of the same system. Pop quiz. Anybody know this street? Anybody want to guess? It's the Appian Way. You got it. One try. So the Romans were really good at this. And they standardized a couple things. They standardized the width of the chariot wheels. So the ruts would occur in, roughly the same way from place to place. And then they standardized the way of building the road, the subbase and the layers above it, so that they would be functional in all kinds of weather. And it gave them those two things gave them the ability to conquer the world, basically. Pretty amazing. And you can still go you can still see the Appian Way in Europe. We have been for 3,500 years, or maybe even 5,000 years by some estimates, building settlements, and we can use that experience. We've inherited all kinds of streets that we can look at, and observation is your superpower, and then decide what from that street we might or might not want to incorporate. We've got urban streets, and we've got skinny streets, and we've got streets where most of the pedestrian space is in the middle rather than at the edges. We've got streets that go from being full of vehicles to allowing only bikes and pedestrians. We've got streets that parts of buildings span over. We've got streets where, because of the way we lay the geometry of them on the ground, we lend importance to the institutions that are along them. This is so that this is a combination of two valuable urban design principles: the terminated vista, which means it sounds like a credit card problem. So that's what's happening here with the center. And a deflected vista, because the face of the building is canted into your field of vision as you look down that street. And the whole idea there was to use architecture and the position of the building on its lot to send a message about the importance of the institution inside. Or not. There's an institution way back here. Okay, so as urban designers, we often talk about the public realm. That's a jargon term, but what it means is the space between the buildings. And so when you're doing a CEQA analysis or an environmental report, you might add up the quantities, the number of square feet, or the number of dwelling units inside the buildings for that analysis. What really matters a lot is the quality of the space between the buildings. That's the one thing that's hardest to fix later, but we can do it. We notice here, as wildlife biologists, that this species is largely absent from the picture, but the sign tells us that they must at least at times be there. I'm just going to compare that to a random street in Paris, but this is a pretty ordinary street by Parisian standards, which says a lot. And here, the public realm is a place where people love it so much they want to go back to it over and over. And we can clearly see that although there are cars moving around and deliveries being made and cars being stored here, it feels like human habitat in which the car has been welcomed as a guest. Very interesting thing to do at the center of your town. Now, on our leafy Elm Streets and Maple Streets lined with residences, we can also have the same thought about the public realm. You're this one versus this one. These look very different, but they're not, at least not in the crude tools normally used by planners, like in those color-coded future land use maps and zoning maps. These are the same color. These are the same land use. They're the same density and dwelling units per acre. The homes are on lots of about the same size. The square footage of the homes is about the same. They store the same number of cars in each case. So what's the difference? Anybody? Okay, yes?
Garage doors facing the road.
Garage doors, yes, the street trees, the garage doors, the porches, everything. In the sort of classic design example, this is, by the way, new development. It's newer than this one. In the classic example, the things that belong on the fronts of buildings, like those doors and windows and storefronts and balconies, are on the fronts of buildings, the front porches. And in the atrocious example, we've enshrined on the front of the building the appliance we hold most dear. Sending messages. Now, if we dial back a little bit into history and you look just not that very long ago, this is 1908 in Manhattan, you can find something pretty interesting. This is Herald Square. That's the Times Tower in the distance. So down there's Times Square. So here's Broadway in New York. By the way, the New York Herald building was built when we had a different attitude about journalism also. We thought that the journalists deserved a palace in which to work. But so zooming in on that for a second, at that time, you could see that the street was being used by all kinds of people. Broadway actually had cable cars with cables underground pulling them. But they also had Model Ts and horse-drawn carriages and people on bikes and lots of people on foot moving back and forth. What you won't see is a lot of markings. There's not a lot of paint on the street. There aren't any signs. There's no traffic signals. All of those users in the space were moving at relatively close to the same speed. And so there was an interaction. In fact, even the people who were waiting to get on the cable car would stand out in the middle of the street to board. And it was just considered normal that this was people space. And then around 1922, this all began to change rather dramatically in what the scholars now call organized motordom, which is the term the companies used for it at the time when they took over public policy. So here's also New York. This is on the Upper East Side, Lexington Avenue. The bottom picture is Lex when they were building the Lexington Avenue subway below ground there. So you can see there were planks on the sidewalk as a temporary fix. That's the busiest subway line in the world. And so New York, our greenest metropolis with the highest percentage of people who are moving about by transit and walking, the lowest number of people who own cars or use cars. Even there, that street was modified a lot. Here's 100 years later, the same corner, you can actually, if you look closely enough for the architectural detail, you can make out the things that tell you it is in fact the same street. Somebody came along and they found out how to fill in those English basements, slice off all that architectural detail that was on the front of the brownstones, and skinny up the amount of space that was available for pedestrians and landscape, and increase the amount of space for cars. They thought they were setting up a 20th century city. That's what they were doing. Right? So one of the places that we can apply these philosophies is in historic places at the center of town. This is probably obvious, but I'll show you an example. It's a main street. Clematis Street is called, and this is in West Palm Beach. Here's the street at the time of settlement. I find it very interesting that when the street was not even yet paved, it was just a dirt path, the buildings were already urban. Standing up straight, built right behind the sidewalk, doors and windows, multi-story. They were meant to send a message, this is a city, we're gonna stay here, we're permanent here. And so as the street evolved over time, and the flight to the suburbs occurred, and the decline of our downtowns generally occurred, this is how Clematis Street evolved. They widened it, and they made the space for pedestrians smaller and smaller, added more and more space for cars to squeeze a few extra cars out at the end of the workday when everybody would decant into the suburbs. They made the street one way at one point. So here's Clematis Street not very long ago. The street began to revitalize as part of an aggressive vision plan for downtown West Palm Beach's improvement, but there were problems. Now they had outdoor dining, but they didn't have enough room for it. And good luck if you're in a wheelchair trying to make it through that space. Mm-hmm. So here's West Palm Beach's main street now. This is the same street. That's the after picture. So this was reconstructed starting in 2018 in 3 phases. Now it has wide sidewalks, still has on-street parking, not quite as much. It has street trees, and it still has 1 lane each direction. They're just slow and narrow by design. It's also curbless and shaded and easy to close for special events and special days. And I like this aerial because it shows you the relative proportion of the space from building face to building face that is actually available for moving and storing cars. It's just subtle enough that it changed everything about the street. It's now slow in its operation. So notice this cyclist is on the wrong side of the road. Not really a problem. Everybody can see each other. He's just improvising. And they close the street often for events. So these are just images of the way Clematis Street changed. Fairly different from the 1950s and 60s pictures I showed you, right? So we can, in fact, change these things we've inherited. I'm going to show you a detail because it's just too fun not to show it to you. We discovered in phase one that the bollards that are retractable only cost a few $100s more than the ones that are fixed. So in the later phases, we installed bollards on both sides of the parking spaces so that within a few seconds, you can turn a key and pull a handle and convert an on-street parking space to an outdoor dining space or vending or seating area, which was kind of fun. So it turns out to be a lot more flexible. Then that turned out to be important when we had a pandemic and we had to move the activities inside buildings outside for a while. So we can also do this in new development. Here's an example from Colorado. This is Colorado's skinniest new street. It's called Swift Street, not because it's fast design speed, Metro. It's because Peter Swift, the engineer, signed the drawings that said, yes, we can make it that narrow. It's the skinniest new street. So this is brand new development, and yet it has a kind of car-tamed, low-car sort of environment. We can also use this approach toward retrofitting suburbia, changing the places that are graying out, like the old shopping centers as they're aging none too gracefully, and we need to think about how they might be replaced. That actually is one of our best sources of room to accommodate growth as it occurs, however slowly or rapidly. Recapturing the lost space. We can add housing variety, we can still have retailing, maybe not quite as much. We can make workplaces and good places to work from home because you can walk down the street to that coffee shop. Now, streets sending messages do a lot of powerful things. They tell you where you are. This is Pacific Grove, down in Monterey County. And if you stand on that street in Pacific Grove and you look west, your brain just tells you that where the sky comes all the way down to the railing, that's the ocean. You can't see the water there, but you know that's the overlook of the ocean. So even if you live several blocks from the water's edge, you are connected to it. You feel connected to the ocean in Pacific Grove. Streets tell us when we are. But you step out of a building like the one we're in, the street, it greets you, gives you information. What time of day it is, what time of the year it is, and streets change in order to send you those messages. And of course, they send you messages about the institutions. This is in Yellow Springs, Ohio. What's this? A terminated vista. Right? Okay. Horace Mann built that building. Context is really important. So if we're designing in the heart of the city, we shouldn't use details that were designed for the automotive-dominated suburb, right? So the corner turning radii, the lane width stuff, all those details are inappropriate to shoehorn in on top of your historic cities. Now, by the time I get to about here in any presentation, someone says, "But Victor, we're not Amsterdam."
But Victor, we're not Amsterdam.
Well done. Actually, Amsterdam wasn't always Amsterdam. Not very long ago, as recently as the early 1970s, Amsterdam was looking like this. Their famous Dutch bike culture had waned, and they were adding cars as fast as they could add them, turning plazas into parking spaces, and jamming their streets. And of course, those who are still out there trying to reform life's basics, walking and biking, were finding themselves with less and less of the space to do it. To go to Amsterdam today, the space has been reclaimed and the economic activity has gone up. The incomes have gone up. So they haven't paid a price for that. Now, we need a big menu. We need streets that are like parkways. We need main streets. We need skinny streets, that are low car or no car. We need step streets and passageways. We need mid-block walkways that take us between where we are right this second and where we need to be, like maybe where our car is parked. Why not have that contribute to the experience instead of subtracting? We need canal streets. This is an important detail in retrofitting to adapt to climate change and sea level rise. We also need wide streets, and wide streets can be pretty great. I don't want you to get the impression from me that only skinny streets are worth putting in a book. Commonwealth Avenue in Boston is a prestigious address, like St. Charles is in New Orleans, for example. Now I'll leave you with 5 things you can demand as you're contemplating what kinds of streets to have in your town. The first one, the streets where people want to be, have a shape. Use that Amsterdam example again. They're like a public room where the buildings on both sides are like the walls, and the carriageway and the sidewalks are the floor. And to a certain extent, we might have architectural features or street trees form a ceiling. Second, the streets where people want to be are comfortable. Depending on the time of year, that might be a different solution in one climate than another. Here, solar access is more important than shade in the subtropics. So let's just call it comfortable, not necessarily shade. The streets where people want to be tend to be connected to the rest of their surroundings in the city. They're on the natural paths between your daily origins and destinations. That's why main streets pop up where there are people going back and forth, and someone puts a storefront and tries to sell you something as you go by. The streets where people want to be are safe, as I described before. And here's the most elusive one. The streets where people want to be leave an impression on you that sticks. They give you memories, form memories in that place. And that comes from having human creativity on display. It might be in art, whether official or unofficial, or it might be in the landscape, or it might be in architecture or signage. But human creativity on display tends to be one of the essential requirements. I would point out that, since we brought up trees, never underestimate the power of even a single tree to change your impression of the street. Not necessarily always have to have a long tree line. Now, on the subject of connectivity. And I know Mary and Lisa, you're tired of hearing me say it because I've said it twice already this week. Two-lane roads will carry a lot more traffic than one 4-lane road. Network is everything. Having relatively small block sizes and an interconnected web of streets is much better than having a tree-like pattern where every trip requires going from the farthest end of a branch on a cul-de-sac back to the trunk line where everybody else is trying to move. And so if this had the same number of lanes in both of these diagrams, but in two lanes in each direction, but the capacity of the system on the right for accommodating trips of all kinds, including car trips, is much, much greater. On the subject of wider streets, I'll say we have across the globe many examples of wide streets that are positives for their community. This is the Avinguda Diagonal in Barcelona. Wait, Victor. But Victor, we're not Barcelona. No. Somebody had to design this, so Barcelona wasn't always Barcelona either. We're talking about modes of travel. If you go to Seven Dials in London, which by the way, a speculative real estate developer constructed in the late 1700s. It's very interesting. There are lorries making deliveries, and there are London taxis going back and forth and cars moving around that space. But pedestrians feel like the dominant species. And people walk out into the center, sit on the monument and watch the ballet of life go on around them. It's quite remarkable. Over here, not so much. Where would you prefer to live? Which would you prefer to eat? The rock or the jelly donut? Rock. Jelly donut. Those are the choices. My friend Angie Schmidt, who wrote a great book called Right of Way, it's an analysis of race and class and the terrible epidemic of injuries in America's streets, should read that. Angie said driving should be a privilege and walking should be a right. Somehow we've gotten it backwards. You'll hear people refer to modes of transportation. Dan, we use the word modes. Like walking is a mode and driving is a mode and so on. Well, the choice of which modes to accommodate, which ones to use for one trip or another, is a choice about how much space you're going to take. Yeah, because look at the difference in the amount of space that 400 cars takes versus 400 people on buses versus 400 people on a train. And see the difference there. So if the engineers use the phrase alternate or alternative modes of transportation to refer to walking and biking and transit, stand up and say, hold on a minute here. Walking is the original mode. Walking and biking are the older modes. They're not alternative modes. And lots of people tell us that they would rather walk or bike if it was safe and beautiful and it felt improved and they could do so. That there are some trips they would replace with walking and biking that they're now making in cars. And of course, you have to create an environment where that feels natural, like protected bike lanes, for example. This is Austin, which was one of the first in our country to install protected bike lanes. The Europeans have gotten really good at installing protected bike lanes. They feel like spaces where you can be really at home, moving back and forth on foot or on a bike. That's one of the bridges in Florence that I was telling you about. And I guess one last thing about cycling that seems important is we have many different kinds of cyclists. We do have the mammals, the middle-aged men in Lycra, I didn't make that up, who are clipped in, to the pedals and are leaning down in the drops and are getting their heart rates up. That's one kind of cyclist. But there are others. Look at the young lady here who's dressed casually and she's not clipped in, she's not wearing a helmet. Then the fellow on the far right is dressed for work. He's on his way home. He's a little older. He's taking a break on the side of the path. All of them are cyclists. So we tend to, if you read the comments on Nextdoor or the comments on a newspaper article about the latest fatality in traffic, we tend to treat all the people on bikes as if they're a monolithic species. But we're not. We're all different, and we have different needs. We take for granted that motorists are going to make mistakes, but then when cyclists or pedestrians make mistakes, distracted walking, the crosswalk looking at their phone, we'll blame the mistake on them. It's a form of victim shaming. This is what the Dutch call a fietsstraat. Fiets means bikes, bike in Dutch, and a fietsstraat is a bike street or a bike priority street. I would say a bike-paced street. These are streets that have cars. Like you see the cars on the sides and cars moving back and forth in the lanes. But instead of taking the street space and dividing it in two and making one lane in each direction, they divide it into three narrow spaces. Two of them are smooth, so that's where you're going to ride your bike. And one of them is heavily textured. And it's difficult if you have a standard car to keep all four wheels on perfectly smooth pavement as you go down such a narrow thing. And if you have to overtake a bike, then you have to do it slowly enough and safely enough, and only when you can see that there's space to go around them. So that's how the fietsstraat works. It's a bike-dominated street. There's even a sticker on the road which says "Auto te gast," means your car is a guest. Not bad, right? This came up during our walking audits, and so I wanted to raise it again. The streets where people want to be tend to be faced by buildings with doors and windows, like I said, but also they tend to have the pattern in which similar faces similar, like facing like, fronts facing fronts. When we were in Valley West, for example, we saw situations where the public space of the street was faced by the back sides of the buildings, the loading docks and the blank walls and things. Now, that's a correctable error, and in the fullness of time it will be corrected. So if we only have arterials, collectors, and locals, we have too limited a menu. Like in Jaws, they said we're going to need a bigger boat. We need a bigger menu. And that menu will include reintroducing some street types that have been forgotten, like market streets and village streets. Here's a street that's based on the examples in the villages of the Cotswolds. But I forgot it had sound effects. Yes, there are birds. There's birds on. And here's a canal street. This is actually a real street that was constructed in a neighborhood we designed in South Carolina a while ago. And they were going to put a pipe between these two lakes to level out a stormwater issue. And we said, well, what if we have a canal instead? And we turn the houses around, we face them toward that space and put a walkway. And now that's the most desirable part of the neighborhood. And it started off as the center of the land where it was most featureless and with the least interesting views. So that was a good move. So the longer menu is something we bring up in the new version of the street design book called the Catalog of Essential Street Types. We've named 10, there are probably more. And then we illustrated in the book 27 variations on those 10. So you don't have to wait for the book to come out, although it's coming out really soon. Those are, you can read about those or see pictures of them in videos like the one I showed you on street.design. That's the website, street.design. What are we doing all this for? We're to improve people's lives and unleash human ingenuity and creativity. That's why we're building the built environment. Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a final prescription, Dan. Here it is.
Oh.
In new development, grow compact, complete, connected, traditional neighborhoods. And where you are working on your historic places, respect their patterns and don't shoehorn suburbia onto them. And then where you are retrofitting sprawl, do so with vigor. There's lots of progress to be made. Thank you.
I'm going to do my final presentation in two parts. First, to show a little bit on our walks that we were able to take. And again, how many hands for people that joined us on the walks? Marvelous. So we started with the Hupination and looked at several streets and one real key intersection. We had a wonderful turnout, a real mix, and really significant leaders that joined us for this. And once in the field, other folks would come and join us as well, including people that were working on some of the projects. And I'm going to show you the sites in just a moment, but here's the first issue. This is a road that is a connector to all the medical facilities. There are no sidewalks, there's no path. And people are getting picked off trying to get there. In fact, even when the moon is out, they can't get enough light because the trees are so dense. So this, fortunately, has a 40-foot right-of-way. Even though the street, the paving is only 20 feet. However, there are drainage swales. So it's going to be a challenge, but we're looking at possibilities. And remember the word edge lane road. We're looking at how we can make that road work without having to spend a lot of money to fill in swales and so on. So we're looking at short-term solutions as well as long-term. And again, you can see the conditions, and wonderful that they've got the trees, but the idea to put in lighting just would be ungodly expensive. So we're looking at other solutions we can help them with. We got to this intersection of Tishtang Road and Airport Road, and it was just all the paving in the world seemed to have come together here, right? I mean, and a lot of people making very high-speed turns and in a very dangerous condition. So we looked at this. This might be a good location for a mini roundabout, which means it's flat on top or nearly flat, and it will handle any size vehicle and yet bring down the speed of traffic. So when we look at the roundabouts, take a look. I mean, it is so wide that one of our sponsors parked his car in the middle of the intersection. I've never seen that before. Then we got to Tishtang Road further down, and again, two 10-foot lanes, but a 40-foot right-of-way. Here it looks like putting in a pathway would work. So we're looking at a variety of short-term solutions and longer-term solutions. Arcata was next, and Netra, thank you for arranging such a wonderful group of folks. And I'm recognizing faces right now, those of you who joined us. But we learned a lot about what the challenges are, and we had a person who had visual impairment join us, which was marvelous. She was an excellent teacher for us. And then when we got to this, I'm sorry, it's mislabeled. This is the west or the east. Yeah, thank you. But take a look at the building. The building really puts its worst end toward the street, right? When you think of what Victor has taught us, this is a street that you're going to want to drive fast just because it's pretty brutal, right? and ugly. And, but a lot of wonderful mid-block crossings. In fact, I've never been to a town anywhere in the country that has more mid-block crossings. So lots of wonderful opportunity that you're already taking. I'll show you ways that you might enhance these. And again, it was marvelous that people were able to come out. You've already got buffered bike lanes in. And the sidewalks, though, is another thing. They're only 3 feet wide. And so we found that they retrofit just so you could get a wheelchair through. And every fire hydrant and every utility pole has to have one of these little outlets. On West Valley, did I get that right? We found the driveway in was so wide and so fast that this little miniature median has to be watered and grow bigger, right, over time. I'm going to show you some better ways to do that. This is an example. Santa Barbara did a driveway. Handles the same capacity, but this one's attractive. And again, it's going to control the speed much better than the ones there. We also looked at a road or a route in, if you're walking into the stores. This is in really horrible condition. And we understand that there's not a lot of motivation by the owner to improve it, but I wanted to share with you what it really should look like. And give a real sense of welcome for people using transit, walking, biking. So these are just some other examples. These are all California examples. Landscaping and even people driving in are going to feel a little more welcome when they get out of their cars and they can walk the rest of the way in. So McKinleyville, we didn't take walking audits there, but we had a set of meetings that were wonderful. The challenge is today, certainly getting across the street. We have a few treatments that we like, but again, I'm going to show you, these can be enhanced. And then I blanked out on the name of the street.
Hiller.
Yeah, Hiller. These treatments are very important, very needed, but there are better candlesticks or other treatments that can not only be more attractive, but wouldn't be taken out by the motorists, right? But it's already being used. We're very pleased that this connector is being made. Ended up in the wrong place. I'm sorry, this is not supposed to be. Okay, now into Eureka. And again, a wonderful gathering of folks who joined us, including another woman who has visual impairment issues. She was out in front of all of us. I was pretty impressed. Anybody know her name?
Taya Gas.
Thank you. But the city engineer, planners joined us and laid out a very good walking route for us. We got into the neighborhood as well as along the commercial district. What I want to say is every one of these taught us as observers a lot of opportunities. Things are doing really well. And then other things that I'm now going to show you some of the tools that we can further enhance. I love your raised intersections and the nice tight corner radio and beautiful homes. This is an amazing neighborhood, diverse housing. But one thing you're doing really well, and I think that's true in not only Eureka, but also Arcata. Most areas we visited, you're doing really good curb extensions. These are really well done. But in the same neighborhood, we found where we, as Josh was driving, we couldn't inch forward enough to where we could see the traffic. It was coming down the street at a pretty high rate. So there are places where you really need those curb extensions to make the road much safer. Now, the second part of my presentation, I'm going to get into the core ways to make improvements. One would be better connectivity. Now, this is a Florida thing, but notice they have sidewalks, they got some trees, but if you wanted to go to the stores that are right behind your home, There's no way to get there without a 15-minute drive each way. And all they would have had to do is plan a little connector on in. When we talk about street connectivity, on the left is Seattle, one of the higher density levels of street connectivity. The cool thing is, the better connected your streets are, the lower speeds are going to be. Because you just go 300 feet, there's another intersection. And they treat their intersections really well. So they're one of the safest cities in America as a result of the way they built their land uses and applied them. Over on the right, not far from Seattle, is Bellevue. They did not use good street connectivity. And here's the interesting thing. It costs about $2.8 million a year to run a fire station. And in Bellevue, they have to have 4 fire stations because of the poor street connectivity for everyone in Seattle. Now think about that, just for fire service. Then add in police services, utilities, water lines, anything, and you begin to realize if you don't use good land use, not only are you punishing a person who wants to walk or to bike, you're raising everyone's taxes substantially in order to provide the services people need. So street connectivity comes out to be a home run if you get it right. I really love showing this. I found out it's Naples, Florida. Thank you, Victor. One of his projects. But what would you need here to have people feel comfortable walking, have a son or daughter go down to the park? What would you want?
Sidewalks.
Sidewalks, let's put them in. And while we're at it, I'll give you a bonus of crossings, right? But people still aren't walking. What should you put in?
Trees.
Trees. That's good. Now you have a destination. But people still aren't walking, and why?
Nobody there.
The buildings are misbehaving. And until you get the buildings to address the street, as Victor shares with us, then truly you're not going to get the levels of walking, biking, and socializing that you really need. So it all comes together by getting your code right. I got to work on this project. On the left is the way the walk shed would be the 5-minute walk. And the developer knew that they wouldn't be able to break ground and make money because they didn't have enough area. So we went in and fixed the street connectivity pattern and ended up with the 5-minute walk capturing a vast number of additional properties. That again is how important street connectivity is. So I really want to focus on speed control. Almost everywhere we visited, and all the topics I think you're going to want in your neighborhoods or where you go shop or work and play. Speed is the first thing and the most important thing to address. So I'm going to show you the tools. And by the way, the engineering community for the last 50, 60 years believed in this mythology that what 85% of the motorists are doing is the speed you should post. Which only creates the problem that you're going to have high levels of speed. Very fortunately, that's now been turned around and you no longer are required to post based on what 85% of the drivers are doing. That's really good news. The next very important piece of information is the speed at which you get the very highest capacity. That is, the greatest number of cars can move. What speed is that? 27 miles an hour. Above 27, you're not able to hold the same capacity. It's dropping, and the faster, the more it will drop. So we shouldn't post any street above 30. Really shouldn't. And if we want even more capacity, we shouldn't post them above 25, right? So this is going to be very important with what I show you. I think everybody is aware of this, the kinetic effect of speed as you go up in small increments of the number of injuries and the fatalities and the seriousness of injuries goes up dramatically. It's not just a linear progression. So ideally, on a street where you would want to live, you wouldn't want people driving more than 20. There's a lot more noise, a lot more problems all the way around. So I like to use this term, which is now becoming popular in engineering, the target. That means it's the speed we want to design for. We want people to go at the target that we create because it's the proper speed for the mission of the road. And so the street on top, which only has to carry, I think it was 12,000 cars a day, has 7 lanes. You can carry 20,000 cars in a single lane if you don't interrupt the traffic. So the one on the bottom carries 58,000 cars a day. And the people don't feel that it's taking long to go through because it's so beautiful. So what Victor laid down as a base, that solves so many of our problems, make our streets beautiful and not fast, right? So how would you make Chico, California, this is Nord Avenue. How many of you graduated from Chico? Oh, no one here. Okay, last audience, it was over 5. Okay, but anyway, it's okay. You can graduate from anywhere you want. And so if you go from, I'm trying to go down. How fast would you say people are going to drive with the road looking like this? Real fast, right? But what if you do this? Now the speed. And this. And this. Here comes a big one. You terminate the vista. And so now the planner, the engineer have done everything that rules allow them to do. And now the developer comes in because you set the right stage that they can now build buildings that are going to pencil out. And I can guarantee you now the speeds are going to be looking for a parking space speed, right? So maybe 15, maybe 19. But it's each component that helps bring the speeds down to the right level. In Lancaster, California, they really pulled out all stops and built the parking in the middle. The posted speed now is 20, or no, I'm sorry, I believe it's 15, but I've rarely seen more than 12 miles an hour. And this street, which by the way is has no curb, how fast do you think people would go on this street? Yeah, and notice all these are streets that are beautiful. They're the kind of streets that Victor has been discussing. And this street, how fast? Yeah, this is called a yield street. If you have a street anywhere from 22 feet wide, supporting both directions of traffic, on up to, I believe you'll see the break point somewhere around 30 feet wide. But parking on both sides, people have to yield. And those streets are the safest streets in America. They really are. And so, how about this street? How fast do you think people drive? By the way, there's no curb in this street. And that's my house up here. This is only 12 feet wide. And it's just amazing how, 12 feet wide. And I see far more people walking and bicycling up and down my street than I see cars. And the cars that are going up and down the street are doing about 15 miles an hour at most. Why would we want the street to be wider than this, right? Now you go up to a collector category street, and now the tools that are going to help hold down the speed would be building a triple canopy, again the beauty, bringing nature back to the streets, and then having a little buffer to the planter road, and then the sidewalk set back behind the trees, right? So what are the walkability tools of the street again? Nord Avenue, and this is what we planned for. Notice again, we've set the sidewalk back, we've got the planter road, the bike lane, and we even colorized the centermost lane. And this will hold the speed down to about 25, because it has an important role. Now, the next set of tools would work on every one of your communities and could be applied to every neighborhood. That is having a gateway in. This is a community called Watercolor. It's in the Florida Panhandle, and I've never seen anyone driving more than 18 miles an hour, even though this is a collector road. This is an important road for handling, moving down the entire Panhandle. We can also colorize the bike lane, as you see here, which makes the road feel tighter, feel narrower, so that people drive at a safer speed. The newest street in my town, Port Townsend, Washington, which I helped design, I feel really good about. I've never seen anyone driving more than 25 on this street ever since it was built. It's about 2 miles long. And we have 4 raised crossings. And notice a little bit of rubber. I call those teaching points. And when I see them, I say, we have correctly designed this street. Right? Sorry. Yeah. Now let's get into sidewalk, because everywhere we really need to pay attention to how to build a good sidewalk. And you've got some old practices, probably not being done now, that can be better corrected. Again, you see how much more comfortable someone would be if you have the planter road and the setback, and you can put all the other amenities in. Obviously, this is a college campus, so they've got good quality lighting. For people who have visual impairment, what we call the shoreline, you can detect when you're at the shore. The furniture zone, again, very nicely allocated. But this is an 8-foot wide walkway. Where you're going to get higher walking, 8 foot is really what you're striving for. In a regular neighborhood, this is called Baldwin Park in Orlando. Notice what they've done. People create an edge with their fencing, but then there's a little buffer to the sidewalk because people don't want to walk right next to the fence. So that's a very nice treatment. And then, of course, the planter road. You've just gone through a whole study on how to create added comfort for walking, biking, and I'm going to show you my way of looking at how do we improve the pedestrian level of traffic stress. And I would say this sidewalk, because it's set back, you've got a much higher grade, right? But on the other side, it's attached. And so you're right next to fast-moving traffic, so it doesn't feel quite as good. Oh, thank you. But I'm going to introduce something now. Put in the median. And if you put in the median, now you're controlling where the motors turn. So as a result, both the sidewalk on the right and on the left has a much higher rating. So there are tools that you don't even think of as walkability or bicycling that are the most powerful. In fact, if you put in a raised median on one road that we built, it brought down crashes 80%. Think about that. Just that median is probably the most powerful tool you can put in. And then, of course, you can put in trees and control the maneuvers of vehicles. I also like to break down in a commercial district the parts of the sidewalk. The first 2 feet out from the building edge, people are not going to walk, right? They're not even going to stand there, but you can still use that space. And then the furniture zone, if it's correctly lined up, it's very distinct. What that leaves is a space in the middle for the walking and the talking, right? Intersection tools, very, very important. This is where most crashes occur. For motors, for pedestrians and bicyclists, a very high crash rates. These are the tools that I really like to see, and you're doing a number of your intersections this well, but I'm going to show you some that I think are done
exceptionally well. This would be like nirvana. It's a protected intersection, and in this case, look how tight and short the crossings are. And the speeds are low because the road reads you should only be going through this at 15, maybe 20 miles per hour, and yet it works for every size vehicle. It's pretty amazing. So these are the tools, the short, median noses, right? And then the curb extensions. And I really want to put a special effort in on the curb extension. So this one done really well. It's in Davis, California. Here's a wonderful short median. And again, look how comfortable the walking would be. The treatment is quite good. You can then landscape these. And with the landscaping, they're far more noticeable. And motorists will start to slow down sometimes several hundred feet out because they see the obstacle in the street, as opposed to just some pure concrete form. In Maui, we were asked to do an overpass for the pedestrian. In general, pedestrians do not do that quarter mile up, over, down. They'll just go ahead and cross the street. So we said we think we can do a much better job cheaper. And so this is what we proposed. And again, it's a protected intersection. And the motors come in at a much lower speed, and they yield very high yielding to pedestrians or bicyclists. So raised intersections are now becoming pretty popular. I think I've seen more raised intersections in Eureka than I have anywhere else in the country. They're not highly pronounced, but they're there. And but take a look at this possibility here. This is in Exeter. And then the actual mini domed circle. You could still drive any size vehicle through here, but look how colorful it is. Now it becomes a place, and you can put murals on the buildings and so on. So you go from this to this, a very well designed intersection. And this also now becomes a gateway. A little bit of a pitch for roundabouts. Roundabouts are the safest form of intersection you can build, by far. And this is why the standard intersection, whether it's a four-way stop or a signal, is going to have this number of conflicts. And this is just a 2x2. So 32 vehicle-vehicle conflicts, all shown in red, and then 24 vehicle-to-pedestrian conflicts. This is more than most humans can deal with. It really is. And so a roundabout only has a total of 8 conflicts, and they're all at low speed. That's the big difference between the two. So 6 conflicts per leg. If you relieve out a crosswalk marking and you're forcing a person to go 3 intersection legs, then they're dealing with 18 conflicts when they really should only be dealing with 6. Right? But here's the cool thing, that if you have a standard intersection, this is the kinetic energy. This is what does the damage to the car and to a human body. This is a huge amount of kinetic energy. And now I'm going to show you a roundabout, the kinetic energy. Isn't that amazing, the difference? Crossings, I wanted to focus on the quality of crossings. You can go from very short, very low speed, and this one at a school, this one at a trail crossing. Notice all 3 of these have medians. And then you can go down a grade or 2 where they're just not as pronounced or done anywhere near as well. But then you go down to the one where all you did is put in maybe a rectangular rapid flash beacon, no median in any of these, and these become extremely risky. Use a play word. So I'm suggesting that there be a methodology to rate your crossings, score them, and then figure out what steps can we take to boost that. This would be like Nirvana. This is a raised crossing. It's at a school. It's got a median, and really brought a lot of higher respect by the motorists to the children. Another one of my favorites in Tallahassee, Gaines Street. This used to be a 4-lane road. We brought it down to 2 lanes and put a little Z in by forcing the pedestrian to look at the traffic. And also a very safe refuge, so you only deal with one conflict at a time. It's much safer to cross mid-block than at any intersection, because you only have 2 possibilities of a conflict, and if you put a median on them, only one at a time, right? So, Golden, Colorado, snow country, did a beautiful job with this. Notice that the paved portion, that is the asphalt portion, is only 8 feet wide. They extended the gutter pan and made it, even though it's 14 feet, face a curb to face a curb, the motorist only sees 8 feet is for them. And that worked beautifully. And again, really good markings. I think that should become a universal for a collector and above. Always use high emphasis international markings. Curb extensions are part of the intersection, and I want to emphasize on our walk through Eureka, we had someone say they hate these because we take out a parking space. We didn't take out a parking space. We taught you never park that close to an intersection, right? And so you can see how much shorter it is for a person to cross. Instead of 58 feet, down to 32 feet in this particular case. And now the pedestrian can see the car, and the motorist can see the pedestrian. So if I were to only introduce one change at an intersection, it would really be to use curb extensions everywhere we can. Wonderful, this particular trail crossing, and again, notice the median, that's the power. In this case, they bring the speeds of the motors down. A wonderful system. This again gets back to my town, Port Townsend. Just 1 or 5 raised crossings along the street. And truly, it's just a pleasure to drive the street now, where before it was crazy. It really was. You get to higher category roads like this one. You can get some level of a median in with something this low cost, this simple, and it works really well in this location. Now, half signals. Half signals are a fraction of the cost of a regular signal, and I prefer them personally over the Hawk signals because they're a little bit cheaper and they really work. Seattle now has, I believe it's 32 half signals, and they made a significant reduction in their crashes as a result. Lane width, real quickly, you're already doing this in most of your communities. 10-foot lanes are wide enough for anything you need to do, certainly as a default. There are cases where you have high bus traffic or high semi-traffic, where you might want to give yourself permission to go up to 11, but 10 foot is the safest that we can build. By the way, these lanes are only 9 feet wide. This is a state road, and this is a freight route through western New York, and the parking bays are only 6 feet. We didn't have enough space to get bike lanes in, so we put in what's called a park assist lane, so that we could get the lanes down to 9 feet. We just colorized this buffer area for a park assist lane. Any way we can to get the speeds down, we are applying. Ian Lockwood, an engineer friend of both Victor's and mine, took this 36-foot wide crossing, but when it was 3 lanes, and knocked it down to 20 feet. The intersection is now more efficient because pedestrians are out of the street in almost half the time. So you can award the green time to the volume of traffic that needs to be going the other direction. Real quickly, I want to re-emphasize road diets. There are so many opportunities, and whatever you decide to call it, lane reduction, or what are some other words we use? Well, it is traffic calm, but we're taking away a lane.
Lane reverse.
Thank you, I love that. So, when you had 4 lanes, you had times where motors were turning left, but when you have 2 lanes, now you have this new 3rd lane. Now the turning motors is completely out of traffic. So there are many lane reductions that we can do where we're going to improve capacity. The throughput of cars, the delay that the cars experience, are improved, right? We're able to move more cars through that corridor. You see this one they did in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. This is the before, and this is the after. And again, in their case, they were able to award more parking, which helped the downtown businesses. This is why lane reductions work. A single lane, just one side of the street, will carry 1,800 vehicles per hour if you don't interrupt it. So that'd be 18,000. We only count 10 hours, by the way, and that works out beautifully. So that'd be 18,000 vehicles in a single lane. So a 2-lane road will carry 36,000 until you get to the intersection. At the intersection, lanes cannot be that efficient. So if you fix the intersection, you can move a lot of traffic with just 1 lane in each direction. They proved that in this town. They had 21,000 cars that were using the road when it was 4 lanes. But it was backing up 3 hours a day. So they said, we can't do any worse. Let's take out 2 lanes and then put in a turn lane. And the traffic started to flow freely. And then they had to shut down a parallel road during construction, so all that traffic came. Now they're up to 29,000 vehicles per day, and the traffic kept flowing because they had taken out the 2 non-essential lanes and put in one that was very essential for the turn movements. I was working in Brighton, Michigan, and we had already talked through to make this more walkable, we were going to put in a roundabout. But then between my travels there, they were told that the roundabout wouldn't work, that the side street traffic wouldn't get in. And so they bought the signals, and they're actually sitting in the warehouse. They were a week away from installing them. And while I was in town, I said, you promised me a roundabout. And they said, okay, we'll try the roundabout, but we know it won't work. And they put it in. I went there on peak hour, peak day of the year, and from the side street, with them observing, I was able to get in easily within 60 seconds. Now with signals, I couldn't have gotten in that fast, right? So it's amazing what a roundabout will do, 30 to 50% more capacity per lane. For safety reasons, this is a very important street. We had 4 lanes, and we needed to rebuild it because they were taking out pedestrians, the workers in the city. And so we got this built, but in order to do it, we had to put in a roundabout at the street down below. I'm almost finished, folks. So we say that you can take the lanes out easily for any road, 12,000 or 15,000 even. But after that, you really need to have a lot of science and a lot of additional tools in order to make it work. And so we recommend that if you go up to 18,000 vehicles per day, that you do this study. And but Seattle now is clear up to 31,000 for 2-lane roads. Now, some of the other benefits of going down to 2 lanes with the 3rd lane. You have better sight lines. Getting in and out of driveways is much easier. And so just the benefits are across the board for anyone using the road for any purpose. This is in the second time, sorry about that. And I'm wanting to close out on one last topic. Sometimes developers feel that they need 4 lanes in just to say you've arrived, this is an important place. But in this wonderful town, Castle Rock, Colorado, they put in 4 lanes, but then they immediately put in buffered bike lanes until someday, if they ever have the capacity need, they'll be able to put in the added 2 lanes. And I've gone back several times, they'll never need the extra lanes. So quite often, you can do more. And I'm going to close out with this. It's an important new tool. It's called the Edge Lane Road. Essentially, it's a 2-way street. Motors you only use the gray area until a motorist is coming the other way. And if there's not a cyclist or a pedestrian, then they simply pull into that space and they pass without any problem at all. It's a beautiful new treatment. In my town, Port Townsend, we now have 7. We're just a town of 10,000 population. This is one of ours in Port Townsend, and speeds come down. I have a friend who lives on the street. She said I used to have to ask a neighbor to help me back out of my driveway. Now, she can easily get out of her driveway. So there's so many benefits to the tools that we're discussing tonight that go well beyond just how do we improve walking and biking and safety. So thank you for this opportunity. This is what we're proposing. Remind me of the name of the street? That we're going to do. Yeah, Foster.
Oh, Foster Avenue.
Yeah. This is what we're recommending. This is also an edge lane road. We put the walking, biking on one side. So. Okay, I think we're ready for just questions and answers, right?
So it's not a question, it was just, I had an opportunity, I don't really get out and about that much. So I went to a conference at California League of Cities in Long Beach and got to go to Catalina Island. And I was just amazed at the walkability. You have a 25-year wait list to get a vehicle there. Like, you really don't need one. Everybody's on bikes and golf carts and shuttles, and everything is built for pedestrian walking. And I enjoyed that a lot.
It's like Mackinac Island in Michigan. The big CEOs of all the auto industry, they have homes on Mackinac Island. I think it was 1900, they ruled out that there would never be a motor car on the island. There were horses, walking, biking, other modes, and everybody loves to go there for a vacation and so on. But a car-free community like that is pretty darn amazing. Yeah.
I will say that that feature, low car or car optional neighborhoods, car optional neighborhoods like a clothing optional beach. You can wear one if you want to, you don't have to. But that's becoming common in places that are not just vacation destinations. If you go to Tempe, for example, which is a college town, there's a new development there called Cul-de-sac Tempe, which is extremely car light. It's not 100% car free. They have half a dozen Teslas that are charging on one end that are shared fleet for all the apartments, hundreds of apartments. Replacing hundreds of parking spaces with just a half a dozen. You check out the car when you need one. And everybody lives there happily paying less rent because they don't have to give the landlord an extra hidden $350 a month in their rent check to cover the parking space that they don't even want or need.
Yeah, one of the more dramatic examples right now. So there's a study going on in South Bay cities, and I don't know if you know that area down in LA, which is absolutely 100% car dominated. That's it. It's freeways. But they are doing a study now to try to look at sort of slow speed lanes that can be created that they can connect all of the cities with neighborhood electric vehicles and other kinds of vehicles that can also move with cars. So it's going to take a while to do it, but if they can do it there, then it can be done anywhere in the country. So not just a vacation area.
I have a concern about the edge in the intersections, you know, that little triangle. So you've got walkway going in one direction on the street and the other, and then you have a lifted thing kind of in the middle just there. I was walking with my brother holding groceries, and we're walking side by side, and it's a tripping hazard if you've not seen it because you're holding something. And I'm wondering if there's an alternative to that design.
Well, one of the things we love is landscaping any feature that we put near or in a road. Then it's very obvious and a little bit of curving, whatever. So I don't know the exact location, but I totally agree. Things need to be visible and they need to be lit at night and things like that. So engineers are usually being very careful about that. So if that's a particular location, you might want to call it to your city engineer's attention. Thank you.
I'm curious if in your walking audits of various cities you've noticed patterns of enforcement or adherence to California's recently passed daylighting laws and how they affect urban walkability.
Here you go, Dan.
The daylighting means that you can't park within 25 feet of the intersection. Yeah, we're working in Ukiah right now on a street project. It's something we should have always been doing, but again, you could either have them be painted red and hope for law enforcement getting compliance, but that's the other reason for curb extensions. It opens up those sight lines and guarantees that you'll be able to see as a motorist the pedestrian the motorist. So it's a wonderful law. But other states have been doing it for quite a while. And California's been doing it. They just didn't make it a law that all cities had to do that, right?
It's a law now.
And now it is. Yeah, now it's required. I think it's a very positive thing.
Hi, do you know how time-limited parking, like 2-hour parking, impacts automobile dependence in, say, downtown areas?
One thing I always recommend every community do is a parking management study and figure out how the parking is being used, abused, and come up with ways that we can control the amount of parking that we need. We have way overparked our country. And only towns like Cambridge, Massachusetts is a good example where they have the right amount of parking. So they've been able to create all the right places and so on. So I think managing the parking by time is a very good way to do that. It obviously requires someone to go around and be able to check on that, unless you're using meters. And a lot of towns are trying to shy away from meters. But I think managing our parking is one of the most important ways that we get walkability back in our downtowns.
I see many locations in which I love on-street parking because the extra friction that they provide on the sides of the road have an immediate traffic calming benefit. And when people park on the street and get out and walk down the sidewalk, well, parking brings pedestrians. So this is actually a useful thing for us. On the other hand, we way undermanage it and we undercharge for it. Now, if you were to take all of your furniture out of your apartment and bring it down out of the building, out into the street, and just set it in the road below the curb, all your neighbors would come out and say, "Hey man, what are you doing? You're putting your personal property out there." But that's exactly what we're doing when we have unmanaged and free on-street parking. So we would have somebody store their personal property there at public expense. So we shouldn't miss the opportunity to manage that. I think the key with parking, whether it's on-street parking regulated as we discussed, or off-street parking, the key is to have just enough, not too much. And if you're succeeding at the goal of making a better and more livable community and adding prosperity, probably what you're doing is decreasing the pro rata share of parking spaces every year. And when I talked about Amsterdam before, they've basically systematically reduced the parking spaces by a little bit every year for the last 40 years. Paris has been doing the same thing for the last 10 years. So maybe one way to think about it is this. Parking is a narcotic. It should probably be a controlled substance. People get hooked on it and they can never get enough. Like they want their fix, they want more of it, and they'll destroy their communities to get it. And the people who sell it will don't care about the outcomes. So we really should be thinking of it something to limit rather than to maximize.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm very curious to learn more about your thoughts on the implementation of slow streets. I've seen a lot of examples of that in San Francisco, closing off through streets and making them only accessible to residents and pedestrians biking. I wanted to know what plans you may have for implementing those more, or if there are plans for them to be phased out.
Yes, slow streets and festival streets and all the whole variety. One of my favorite towns to go and visit, in fact, I just went there for Thanksgiving because it was Thanksgiving and I wanted to spend some money in Canada. Victoria, they are doing street closures kind of in the middle of their blocks. They've got half a dozen on the ground already. And they make it into a wonderful little mini park. Bicycles and pedestrians still go right through, but motors now have to take a curvilinear path. Kind of like what they're doing in Barcelona with the
Super ES.
Super
ES.
And what are those?
Super blocks, but we don't really love that term because that sounds like a street. But it's a filtering where instead of every street having to be car dominated and then minimally pedestrian accommodated, they select a 9-block area and then they make the streets on the outside of it the principal car space for moving back and forth across the city. And then they take the streets in the middle, 2 by 2, and they push those way down in terms of presence of cars. You might be permitted to take your groceries in there if you live there. They might have it open to traffic sometimes a day or week and not others. The kids are playing in those streets. They become garden-like. It's really quite remarkable. So I think Barcelona is giving us permission to launch 1,000 new experiments that Americans have been afraid to experiment.
We're in the dawn of a brand new age, and we're going to see all kinds of wonderful, creative things. But they're typically being given birth in European countries. I just had the great pleasure of going through Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, leading a 10-day study tour for lots of elected leaders. And boy, the things they're doing, and they're getting up to like 60% of all movement is non-auto. I think it's even 70% is non-auto movement. And we're learning, but some of our cities are learning faster than others. And I think your county is going to be one of the real leaders because you've got such great people and such wonderful opportunities. And people like to come here to visit. They're going to be inspired by what you do.
Can I have one more category? Fits your question. Have you heard of the school streets that they're implementing in Paris and now in London? There's about 600 of them now in Paris. Essentially what they do is they take the cars off the street that's right in front of the neighborhood school. And they say, okay, if you're gonna drive to the school with your kid, you park some distance away at the end of the block or outside the front of the school and walk the rest of the way in. And what's happened with that is they've seen safety go way up and the parents walking with their kids to school rather than dropping them off in the mommy and daddy 500 and picking them up at the end of the day. The same way, that become a whole social thing in which the parents and the teachers and the kids are interacting with each other when they're in those school streets. And it's just a little hint of what civilization might look like. Me. Did we get everybody?
Thank you, Una, for having you guys over. I don't think so. March 2020.
Where is it? So there you are. You got applause.
You're welcome.
From us too. Thank you.
So, thank you. This has been great. I didn't see a lot of connection between the energy side of things, and so like when you're getting rid of street lamps, right? You've got a lot of maintenance and a lot of savings you're going to have on your energy and what goes on with those stress grids and everything else. I also want to mention that a lot of the ways you're doing this with climate change, you're going to get a lot better heat effects by getting rid of the pavement and doing a lot more permeable surfaces. So I think in this community in particular, playing up on those benefits, we need to do that.
You're here.
Excellent.
You know, the signalized intersections take a lot of energy through the life of the facility. Dan's examples of roundabouts, get rid of all that stuff, you have to constantly pump electrons into it. Save a lot of money.
Final
Is a
words.
good place to end.
Final words. Do you have some? Because I do.
Well, I'll end with this. You've probably heard this said before. We all grew up under the, walking under the shade of trees we didn't plant, or sitting in classrooms we didn't build. What you're doing, you're actually doing for the coming generations, not just your own. And some of this takes a long time. The sooner you start, the better, the quicker the benefits will come.
And I just love the whole concept of model projects, that you build some housing, maybe a pocket neighborhood, or whatever you do is now going to be tested, evaluated, and then inspire other developers, changes in code, and so on, to where the new norm is to build for people, to build for place. I'm always inspired when I come to Humboldt County. You guys truly are leaders, but there's a way for you to go out and see what some others are doing. We'd love to give you a list of the best examples. But I will say, there are a couple cities that, if you just happen to be in the area, are really worth studying. One is Cambridge, Massachusetts. They have quadrupled their density and dropped the traffic, the car traffic. Same in Vancouver, British Columbia. They've increased their density 5-fold, and they're now seeing less traffic congestion. So the answer is doing the right thing and stop doing the stupid stuff. Right? So, Josh, what would you leave as golden imparting words?
Oh, I'm just glad that you brought that up, because we don't need to pave everything. It really doesn't help very much. So, and then one other thing, in making it possible to actually build things, because it's too expensive to build anything anymore, is that I do work with a lot of developers, and when they do pro formas, you all know what a pro forma, okay, so they have to figure out if this thing's even gonna work. The first thing they do is they look at the price of the land. The next is they go, how are we gonna load it for cars? And usually what happens is, okay, we're gonna lose about a half or 2/3 of it for developable property. We can't make it work, or we're gonna have to do something that there's no way the community is gonna allow. So, anything that we can do to start backing off a little bit on cars, and we'll take some chances. It could be a little annoying trying to park and things like that, but we'll get a whole bunch of other stuff happening that we haven't seen for, I don't know, a century. So,
I think that's it.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody.